All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Marilyn Whitney, Superintendent Ibarra's Deputy for Communications and Policy, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'll apologize for the dings as people continue to log on and join us, but I wanted to go ahead and get started. Superintendent Ibarra wanted me to pass on her thanks to all of you, your administrators, your teachers, your staff, for everything that you're doing to reopen your schools safely and make sure that great things are happening for Idaho's kids. So I want to just let you know who's in the room here today that you'll be hearing from. I'm joined by Superintendent's Chief Financial Officer, Julie Oberle, her Federal Programs Director, Karen Sae, her Director of Communications, Carlin Laraway. And we're also happy to have Greg Wilson, the Governor's Senior Policy Advisor for Education, with us as well. I'm going to turn things over to Julie and Karen in just a minute to run through a few slides. I want to let you know those slides will be posted on the department's website, both on the CARES page under federal programs, as well as on the reopening page that you can get to directly off of the SPE's front page. So just a quick caveat up front this afternoon, we don't have answers to all of your questions yet. But we wanted to give you the information we do have at this point so that you can be thinking about how your district might utilize the new funding that is now available and that will be distributed to you very soon. We are collecting your questions. We will post an FAQ on the CARES and the reopening website. We will keep that updated. We will make sure that you get additional information as it's made available. So go ahead and enter your questions in the chat. We'll track them, we'll include them in the FAQ. We're also recording this webinar for those who aren't able to join us this afternoon. And I know that we're all very grateful for the governor's support of our schools and our students and for the additional funding to support your efforts as you reopen. But before I turn it over to Greg, just a couple of reminders. If you would, please keep yourself muted. It would also help to have you turn off your video because then you don't get feedback, and put your questions in the chat. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Greg to say just a few words, and then Julie Oberle will take it from there.
Yeah. I'm going to be very brief for Maryland, and the ding has kind of thrown me off. I'm having good ideas as I talk, but that's definitely not the case. So I just want to reiterate that, yes, the department today is going to provide sort of the initial what we know at this point, so you can all start preparing and thinking about how you can apply this money toward a safe reopening, and that's the governor's priority. You know, we got this guidance on September 2nd, and we continue to get clarifying guidance from the U.S. Department of Treasury, and so to that end, and I had a call with the K-12 Council this morning to talk a little bit about that. To that end, we are going to put out additional information that takes that Treasury guidance and really provides you kind of the guardrails for how you can spend this $98.7 million. But the bottom line is the governor's #1 priority is to continue your efforts in safely reopening our schools statewide. And as a lot of you know, the governor has been traveling the last 3 weeks extensively, seeing all the hard work of our educators. He is very appreciative of the efforts and knows that superintendents, school leaders, and staff are really working overtime in these really extraordinary times. And so really wanted to, as quickly as possible, convey to you that we had intended on putting this additional resource that is the amount that we cut our K-12 budget this summer with, to put this money back toward safely reopening our schools. That's all I really have. I don't want to go to the experts. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Greg. My name is Julie Oberle, and I'm going to talk to you about how these dollars are going to get to you, the actual distribution. But before I do that, I just want to mention that there has been a lot of talk and a lot of questions relating to the topic of, are these dollars specifically for those items that were reduced or eliminated per the governor's 5% holdback? And the answer is no, and I'll tell you why. But just as a quick recap, that movement, the governor's 5% holdback, eliminated movement on the career ladder for your instructional and pupil service staff. The 2% base salary increases for administrators and classified staff was eliminated. Leadership premiums were eliminated. The distribution factor was reduced. And then the distributions for professional development, IT staffing, technology, content and curriculum, and the dollars spent at the department on behalf of schools in our central services, those items were all reduced. So this past Tuesday, the governor's COVID-19 Financial Advisory Committee allocated $99.3 million in federal funds for schools. $98.7 million of that was allocated for public schools. $565,200 will be sent to the Idaho Educational Services for the Deaf and the Blind, ISDB, in Gooding. I want to emphasize that this is a one-time distribution of funds. So, and after discussions with the governor's office, the public schools distribution will be based on your 2019-2020 fall enrollment. And that is available on the State Department of Education's website in the public school finance area. The dollars will be distributed to you in the same manner as we do other special distributions. The distribution will be approximately $315 per your 2019-20 enrollment reported to us as of that first Friday in November in 2019. The distribution will not be done via the State Department's grant reimbursement application, the GRA. And I want to remind you that per the U.S. Treasury Department's guidance, these dollars must be obligated or spent by no later than December 30th of 2020. So again, this distribution is not a dollar-for-dollar replacement of the governor's 5% holdback. Those dollars that I mentioned earlier that were eliminated or reduced would have been distributed to you based on things like your FTE counts for your instructional and your pupil service staff, their movement on the career ladder, midterm and best 28-week support units, and on your midterm average daily attendance. This distribution is based solely on the fall enrollment from the prior year. So with that, I will turn the time over to our Federal Programs Director, Karen C.
Thank you, Julie. My name is Karen C., and I'm Director of Federal Programs. Good afternoon. These funds are for COVID-19 related necessary expenditures, such as Greg mentioned, reopening our schools. We'd like to draw your attention to the U.S. Department of Treasury's September 2nd, 2020 guidance, question 53 specifically. The Treasury Department presumes that expenses for the per student amount are eligible expenditures and no documentation on the specific use of these funds is required. We urge you to consider prioritizing your spending of the CARES Act funds, which are one-time funds. The coronavirus relief funds have a very short performance period ending December 30th of this year. This applies to the $98.7 million special distribution that we're talking about today. It applies to the $30 million blended learning grant for which LEAs had to submit an application, and it applies to a couple of the other smaller grants specific only to a few LEAs. We recommend you spend the special distribution funds first. The elementary and secondary emergency school relief, or ESSER funds, on the other hand, do not expire for another 2 years. This includes the $43 million in flow-through funds that were made eligible to LEAs on June 24th, the $3.785 million for ESSER blended learning, also known as LMS priority, Those funds were released July 27th, and the $1 million for social emotional learning released September 3rd. Based on Treasury Department guidance released again September 2nd, these additional funds that Governor Little is providing to elementary and secondary schools have considerable flexibility related to COVID-19. It's important to repeat that the Treasury Department presumes the COVID-19 expenses up to the $500 per student are eligible expenditures and that no documentation on the use of these funds is required. These funds will be distributed by the State Department Public School Finance Division through a special distribution at approximately $315 per student, and they are considered discretionary dollars. We strongly encourage you to track your expenses for the FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act. Just a reminder that like all coronavirus relief funds, these are used to cover costs that are necessary expenditures incurred due to the public health emergency with respect to COVID-19. That these funds were not, or expenses were not accounted for in the budget most recently approved as of March 27th, 2020, and were incurred during the period that begins on March 1st through December 30th. Just a quick note that equitable services requirements do not apply to coronavirus relief funds, and that includes the $98.7 million in special distribution dollars that we're talking about today. Also, indirect cost rates may not be applied to payments received from coronavirus relief funds. Direct costs are eligible, but not indirect costs. We have some resources here on this slide. These are important resources to consider and review. And as Marilyn mentioned earlier, we are, your questions are very important to us. They help inform us on technical assistance to provide. So we will give you we will respond to your questions to the best of our ability with the information that we have right now. Our job is to support you by providing that information. And again, please submit your questions and we will answer them to the best of our ability.
Okay, I'm going to start with the first questions in the chat and go down the list as we are able. So the first question from Gail Jefferson: if the school distribution is based on 1920 enrollment, how will the distribution of new schools be calculated, Julie?
So we had 5 new charter schools begin operation in fiscal year 2021. And what we did for that was we pulled those charter schools and got their enrollment as of September 10th. And that was what will be used for their distribution. Everybody else will have their fall enrollment from last year.
And the follow-up question to that, Julie, is what about growing schools?
So what we have right now, what we know right now is that we will distribute the $315. And when we ask the governor's office about that, they will be back in touch with us and we will share that information with you as we learn more.
Thank you. Karen, can you please state the expenditure period again for these funds?
Yes, the expenditure period is March 1st through December 30th of this year, 2020.
Brian Wallace has asked if we code expenditures to the general fund.
All right, I'll take that question. When we had similar dollars in, I think it was like fiscal year 2011, 2012, some of you are going to remember those as Ed Jobs funds. They were for general expenditures, just like these dollars are. And so we did ask schools to code these dollars to Fund 100 and to use revenue code 445-900, which is other indirect restricted federal. And I would encourage you to consider having a fund detail or some way to map these dollars that are specific to the $98.7 million made available by the governor so that you can fulfill reporting requests, maybe as Karen mentioned, from the media and even your auditors.
Wendy Lee has asked if we can apply administrative costs to these funds.
I think Karen mentioned that the indirect cost rate cannot be applied to these funds. Karen?
The only thing I would add to that is that guidance suggests that if you do have someone who is spending time working with these funds, that those are considered direct costs and can be applied, but you cannot apply overhead costs or other indirect costs.
Jennifer has asked if we would send out the slides. Jennifer, we will both email them to everyone who registered for today's webinar, and we will also post the presentation on our Coronavirus CARES Act page as well as our reopening page. So you will find it in multiple places. Randy Dewey has asked if you can define obligated. Does a payroll encumbrance count?
Karen, do you want to do that one?
That is a good question. I'm not exactly sure of the distinction between obligated and encumbrance. I use the word obligated. So, for example, if you are ordering some supplies, the purchase order has to show that you need the supplies by December 30th. You're obligating those funds by December 30th.
Is it still the position of the State Department of Education that teachers will not move a rung on the career ladder this year?
So, Carlin, I'll take that one. It's not the department's position. The governor's 5% holdback last July froze the career ladder for the current year. That has not changed. Because, and again, just to emphasize, this is one-time money. So the career ladder is not being unfrozen for this fiscal year.
Julie, can you please repeat how you would like folks to account for the funding in terms of budget codes and revenue codes?
Sure. So the question was, how would we like to see you do it? We'd like to see you code it within the General Fund 100 using revenue code 445-900. And when this special distribution is made, just like we've always done in the past, a memo will accompany it, and we will include that information as well.
David Satudu has asked, what will happen to these special distribution funds if we are not able to spend them in the next 3 months?
So I'll go ahead and take that one, but if the money is not spent by December 30, it will revert to the federal government.
Tony Carver has asked if this is based on student enrollment or ADA from last year.
The distribution will be based on your enrollment as of the first Friday in November. And if you go to the school finance portion of the State Department's website, you will be able to go to the enrollment section and see what that number is for your charter school or school district.
And we can send a link out to that page as well.
Yes.
Brady Dickinson has asked if we want to hire additional custodians, can we only use the money through December 31st?
Yes.
Yes, that's true. And it's actually through December 30th, not December 31st. But yes, that's true.
Through December 30th, Brady. We may have missed it, but when will these funds be made available?
So we've been told that the governor's office would like us to get these funds out as soon as possible. We don't have a specific date. We're hoping that it will be perhaps even by the end of this month, but by early next month. And we'll keep you updated. We'll get you a specific date as soon as we can.
Brian Kress has just appreciated the information, so he sends his thanks. Wendy Lee has asked a question. These funds and the CARES funds do not require equitable services. We're going to give that to Karen.
Thank you for your question, Wendy. The CARES Act includes the ESSER funds and the coronavirus relief funds. The ESSER and GEAR falls with ESSER. Those funds are subject to equitable services requirements. The coronavirus relief funds are not subject to equitable services requirements.
Michelle has a question, Julie, about RTEC charters because they share half enrollment. So she wants to verify funding allocations to those schools have been done correctly.
Michelle, we can talk offline on that, but we simply used, at the governor's request, we used the enrollment information as of that first Friday in November. So we can talk more after this webinar. But if you do go to that school finance website, you can look to see what we did use for the 2 charter schools. And when I'm looking at my preliminary list, I'm seeing that RTEC 331.1 had an enrollment of 204 students, and that RTEC Industrial had an enrollment of 209 students.
How do we go back to last year's expenses and change the codes to track if an audit has already been done?
That's a great question. I would certainly document on the outside my accounting system how those dollars were spent if they were COVID related.
Do we need to go through the budget amendment process to do that?
So to go through the budget amendment process, if you are simply documenting on the side how those dollars were spent, you would not need to go through the budget amendment process because the dollars have already been spent. But that brings up a great question on, do you need to amend your fiscal year 2021 budget for all these extra federal dollars that are coming your way? And what I would suggest that you do is that you, well, number one, re-examine your budget to begin with to match up with what is actually happening for this school year on your enrollment, your attendance, who you've hired. And then any budget amendments that you decide are necessary, I would recommend that you do at the same time as you set your fiscal year 2022 budget. I think that's a pretty common practice in the districts and the charter schools, is to amend your current budget at the same time you're setting your next year's budget.
Okay, Chris James has asked, leadership premiums, gifted and talented, professional development, and other line items were not included in our budgets this year because they were cut. Can the coronavirus relief funds be used for any of these purposes?
So I'm going to share this question with Karen. Remember, number one is these dollars wouldn't have been distributed to you anyway until the spring when we had current year funding information. But these dollars need to be spent for COVID-related activities. And so, Karen, do you want to?
I don't have anything else to add to that, Julie. I just want to emphasize they need to be related to COVID-19 expenditures.
So Wendy has asked a similar question. To apply these funds, do they have to be unbudgeted?
Yes, they have to be unbudgeted as of March 27th.
How would they know we spent the money by December 30th? Is there going to be a report?
So I'll go back to what Karen earlier said, that as with any federal funds, you should be tracking these expenses, and you should be ready to justify how they were spent and when they were spent.
These dollars are subject to your regular audit that you have annually. And this might be a good time to remind schools that the single audit threshold, I believe, is $750,000 in expended federal dollars per year. Some of the schools out there that have been just below that limit, or that cap or that dollar amount, You may be subject to a single audit act for fiscal year 2021 based on all of these additional federal dollars that you're receiving. So just remember to plan accordingly.
Scott Wolstenhume has asked, even though teachers will not move on the career ladder, can LEAs use these funds as one-time payment to teachers and staff?
Sure. Salaries and benefits can be paid using these funds for overtime hours outside of staff's contract time. They may not be used for bonuses, but they may be used for stipends for COVID-19 related work outside of contract time.
And I just want to go back to what Greg Wilson from the governor's office shared. They have asked for some additional clarification from the U.S. Treasury Department. And as I said to begin with, we may not have answers to every single one of your questions because I'm seeing a few more pop up. We are giving you the guidance that has been issued thus far, which is why we've included all the links to that guidance. So we would really encourage you to look through that guidance, to study that guidance, and then to stay tuned because there will be some additional clarification from the U.S. Treasury Department. And I also just want to make sure you all know that whether it's the U.S. Treasury Department or the U.S. Department of Agriculture with child nutrition programs or the U.S. Department of Education, there have been numerous clarifications and additional issuance of guidance, and we have no control over that. We will just promise to get it to you as quickly as we can and to clarify and answer questions to the best of our ability based on what they provide us.
If these funds are being distributed and not drawn down through the GRA, how would any unused funds be returned?
Again, it depends. We are asking that you track these funds, and it's going to be on the honor system. We're the conduit to get these governor's funds to you, and that is our understanding at this time, is that you will need to track that, and if necessary, return the funds.
And I'll just say that, as you all know, there's been a real focus on making sure that you all have the support you need to continue offering education and opportunities to your students. And there's been a broad recognition at the state level and the federal level that this is costing you all a lot more money. And there's a real push with these funds specifically, and that's why the December 30th date, to get them out to you and to get them on the ground and working so that you're able to do what you need to do for your kids.
Nancy Landon would like to clarify, I thought the feds assume that COVID-related costs are up to $500 per student or per pupil.
Nancy, you're right. That's what the FAQ number 53 says, and that came out on September the 2nd. But it is one of many other FAQs, and it fits within the broad guidance of COVID-related and expenses you would not have otherwise incurred to operate schools during the pandemic. And the presumption is, yes, up to $500 is being spent at the local level to do that, and that guidance is specific to not requiring the reporting that, for instance, you're being asked to do for the $30 million in blended learning grants.
I assume we could make up teacher or staff salary loss on the career ladder and or raises in a one-time payment and check before December 30th.
So that is one area where, we're seeking clarification and additional guidance from the Treasury Department. We don't have a specific answer to that other than to say that the guidance thus far is, again, that it's related to COVID. And so we will, again, get additional guidance to you as quickly as we get it.
If I hire staff and they are encumbered for the year, can we use these funds, or do we need to use another source after December 30th?
So since the camera's still on me, I'll go back to what Karen said about prioritizing those buckets of money. So use this one first for any expenses you're incurring to open your schools or operate during this time period up until December 30th. And then you have ESSER funds, and there, as you know, there's consideration and discussion around additional federal stimulus. So prioritize these funds first and do everything you can to get them spent by December 30th. That is what the law currently says.
Michael Wexler has asked, can we use some of these funds for additional teacher salaries due to an increase in enrollment?
I think that's one that, we're going to have to get some additional clarification for. If the increase in enrollment can be tied back to your operations under COVID specifically, then at this point I would say yes. But again, read through the guidance. We'll provide the additional guidance we get from that the governor's office gets from the Treasury Department, and I know they're hoping they're going to have that very soon.
Can someone please describe what is meant by COVID-related expenses not included as of March 27th, 2020?
So I'm going to paraphrase Brian Kress, and he's going to clarify in the chat if I totally get this wrong. But these are expenses that you're incurring and that you're experiencing that you would not have incurred or experienced but for the pandemic.
Okay, from Jonathan Gillen, do these funds follow the same CFDA as other distributions we received? Specifically, since the distribution we're receiving is approximately $315 of the $500 limit set by Treasury, do any of the other federal funds we have already received associated with CARES Act also qualify under this $500 limit and thus do not require supporting documentation and can still flow through the general fund?
So the other funds, I'm assuming you're referring to the $30 million blended learning grant. That pot of money has specific guardrails. So it would not be included as part of the up to $500 per student.
Okay, next question. Can we use these funds for substitute teachers that we are using to help with social distancing in the classroom?
If it's an expense that you would not have incurred otherwise, then I would say yes. If it's an expense that, if these are positions you would not have hired for, but for the pandemic.
Is it more accurate to say that the career ladder is not technically frozen as it is codified in law and would require legislative action? So the career ladder can't be frozen until January of 2021, is that correct?
I think that that's a distinction that is an important one. As the governor's office has said several times, the Board of Examiners took action on his proposed line item reductions and the freezing of the career ladder. But that, along with the leadership premiums and the technology distribution, will require legislative action in January. When we're talking about the freeze of the career ladder, it's what districts budgeted to and what the department will be funding based on that reduction for this current fiscal year. And I do want to just note the superintendent has included included in her budget request for next fiscal year, fiscal 22, that the career ladder be unfrozen.
To the comment about the Single Audit Act requirement, if these are federal funds, shouldn't we track them in a 200 fund?
Yes. So typically, we do ask that you code your federal funds in the federal fund family, 251 to 290. But these are a bit unique in that they can be used as your discretionary dollars. And so you can certainly code these dollars to Fund 288, 287, 286, but that would also mean you would need to shift your discretionary money or your discretionary expenses over to that fund, or you would need to then do a transfer out of that fund into your general fund to cover those expenses. And so what we did back in like fiscal year 2011, fiscal year 2012, is we just had you deposit those dollars to Fund 100, knowing that they were federal funds, but also knowing that that's where your expenditures were based.
Is hazard pay an allowable expense with these funds? And I'm going to turn this over to Karen for just a second.
Sure. Guidance does say that hazard pay is an allowable expense. Guidance also defines hazard pay as physical labor.
Brian said that you got his comment correct, Marilyn.
Yay.
When can we expect to find out if we can pay teachers and staff a one-time payment to make up for the 5% cut, which came about due to COVID? And that's from Chad Williams.
I know the governor's office is hoping to get some answers to their questions and this additional guidance maybe in just the next few days. I don't want to speak for them and I don't want to speak for the U.S. Treasury Department, but the requests and the questions have been submitted, and they do know that time is of the essence here. And I'll just add, not that this will surprise anyone, we are not the only state that has these questions, and so they're trying to come up with some additional clarifications and guidance as quickly as they can.
From Michelle Capps, if staff are out for 2 weeks due to COVID and we are paying them, can we code their salaries to this for the 6 days paid?
That is a great question, Michelle. And I think we'll do some research on that and include that in our FAQ.
Okay. Well, we're still getting some questions, but we'll try to get to the next couple here. For clarity, if teachers are working overtime to prepare lesson plans in person and online for hybrid teaching, as well as cleaning desks, etc., after every class, and taking temperatures, which all cuts into their prep time, and staying longer after their contract hours, teachers can be paid for stipends for working overtime due to COVID. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and Dalen Allen has said, also it is said that it is from the March approved budget. So technically all the cuts would have been in March approved budget. At one point, I thought they also said, or most recently approved budget, which would then include a budget showing all of the cuts in the governor's holdback. I'm thinking we're a little confused, Dalen, so maybe you can clarify.
I'm not sure.
We're not sure about your question. Brian Wallace has asked if I use classroom technology funds in 2019-2020 for COVID tech costs, I can transfer funds from the general fund to Fund 245 in 2021 to cover these costs.
So if those costs were COVID related, then you can use these funds to cover costs that were incurred from March 1st through December 30th. So the answer is yes.
Jonathan Gillen has a follow-up question to the hazard pay. In the guidance, it appears you could not provide hazard pay in a blanket manner to all employees across the district. So the question is, can we provide it to all employees, or are there specific requirements they must meet?
And Jonathan, that's one of the areas where we're seeking some additional clarification and guidance, because as Karen, I think, mentioned a few minutes ago, the guidance on hazard pay is quite specific. And so we have asked for some additional clarification.
Okay. All right. Right now, that is all of the questions we have in the chat.
And if we missed any, our apologies. They were coming in fast and furious. So we have captured all of them. We are working on an FAQ. We are in close contact with the state board office and the governor's office to make sure that we've got a very consistent, coordinated response to those questions. We will get those out as quickly as we can, as well as any additional guidance and the timing of the special distribution. Our last slide, I think, has contact information for Karen and Julie. You know, you can reach out to any of us at any time. We'll do whatever we can to help you. I'm just checking with Carlin one more time to see if anything else just came in.
More appreciation and thanks from folks in the field. Just a reminder, we'll post the presentation on our website. I will also email it out to everyone who joined us and registered, and we will also post the FAQ as soon as we can.
And I'll just say one last thing. As with everything else about the last several months, this is a little challenging as well. But we know you're up to the task of being creative and innovative in how you can use these funds. And we're here to help you think through that if you need our help and support, and we'll get more information to you as quickly as we have it. And with that, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.